Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're glad that you are taking time from your day to join in the Florida Master Gardener webinar today. I have a few slides to get us going. We're a little bit early, so I'll talk slow. And this image here is of a roselle in my neighborhood blooming in front of a variegated fire bush, which is really beautiful. So I wanted to share that with you because it's almost fall in some parts of Florida. And so in the chat box, if you wouldn't mind putting in where you're joining from, and have you had to deal with urban pests in your personal situation? You don't have to say, but if you'd like to go ahead and say that, you could, and what county you're coming from. So we've got folks from Clearwater, Orange County, Bay County, Alachua County, Orange County, Seminole, Duval, Sarasota, Indian River, Alachua, Escambia, Walton, Miami-Dade, Hernando, Pinellas. Carol says just raccoons. St. Lucie County is here. Volusia County is here. Northport from Sarasota area. Duval County, Clay County, Leon County. Oh, everybody from all over. Seminole, Pasco, Leon, St. John, Sarasota, Volusia County. Gil says not many pests this year in Duval County. That's good to hear. Janice from Volusia, urban pests are food for my critters, she says. That's fun. Let's see. Orange County is dealing with some brown patch in the St. Augustine. Yes, 'tis the season for that. And let's see, Palm Beach County is here. Lee, Marion. I'm looking for Monroe and Miami-Dade. So if you are here, oh, there's Monroe County is here too. Well, fantastic. Well, we're right at 1 o'clock. We got folks from the Panhandle way out, all the way down to the Keys, up to Jacksonville and over to Naples. Some people are dealing with iguanas, and that's fun, but that's not what we're talking about today. Ooh, Pamela has rats after her papaya and mangoes. And another person has got feral cats. Oh, white flies have been infesting my seed grapes. Well, that's very interesting. All right. Well, we have about 300 people joining us today. So we have a great group, and I'm thrilled about that. Of course, I have to do my commercial, my shameless plug for the Master Gardener shirts, hats, and bags and clings. Be sure to swing by the IFAS bookstore website to pick those up. They really are great. And as I'm going out to the counties for the advanced trainings this fall, I'm getting to see everybody's shirts. So that's great. So keep up the good work there. So today we're going to be talking about urban pest and landscape considerations. And for your questions, if you could please use the question answer box as the chat will be on break during the presentation. And both myself and Dr. Oy will be monitoring the Q&A box. So we will get to your questions as we go along. So as I mentioned, our presenter is Dr. Faith Oy. She's an extension professor at UF. She specializes in urban entomology, and she's been with the University of Florida a long time. And we've worked together off and on for a long time, so it's wonderful to have her here today. One of her main thrusts is Pest Management University, and I know a number of you have attended that, and that's probably why you're even here today, because you know how awesome Faith is. And she teaches our pest control and our pest control operators across the state and beyond best management practices and the latest and the greatest about new pests, new technologies, new techniques, etc. But her focus is on human health and well-being. So Faith, we welcome you today. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to stop sharing and let you have the floor.
I'm going to share. So do you see the correct side?
Yes, I see the correct side.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you everyone for having me here today. So I changed the title of this presentation a bit because we really are dealing with structural pests, and that's stuff in the built environment. So we used to identify our subdiscipline as We deal with all the pests, everything except ag. And it's never a good thing to identify your subdiscipline as something that it's not. But everything that's man-made, built environment, that's what we deal with. And the title urban gives the impression that it only happens in cities and urbanized areas. And I will tell you that if you have a bed bug in not a rural, not an urban area or in a rural area, you're going to treat it the same. So structural pests and landscape considerations. And I'm glad I saw some people who mentioned rodents. So what I want to do today is start by little slow there. All right. Start by talking about pests that start in the landscape. They really can become indoor pests. And there's some measures from the industry that say that 75% of the pests that are indoors start from the outside. So we're going to talk about three groups of pests. I'm going to do like the 35,000-foot overview and then talk about some of the controls. But I also want to emphasize that pests are pests because of human behavior, our behavior, and they won't thrive unless we provide those conditions that are conducive to their survival. So here are some of the common complaints that we get on the structural pest control side of things. Ants in the US are still probably number one in terms of the complaints that we get. And a lot of them will start from the outside, but most and come inside. But the pharaoh ant is one of those ants that really thrives indoors. And Florida is one of the few states where you can see pharaoh ants going outside as well as inside. Everybody here knows about the fire ant, I'm sure, and carpenter ants are always a common complaint. German cockroaches are cockroaches that only live indoors. Can you imagine? They are pests definitely because of our human behavior. And bed bugs are also only indoors. So, okay, there we go. Fleas, ticks, pantry pests, fabric pests. The ticks are kind of crossover pests from outside to inside, but they are related to the host that they live on. So we're not going to cover that today, but I do recognize that ticks are a common concern in the state of Florida, especially for those who spend a lot of time outside. So the common complaints outdoors.
Hey, Faith,
Yeah.
some folks are having a hard time seeing, so I'm gonna ask
Oh,
to see if you can maybe switch views to perhaps make it bigger. I can see it fine. So I'm wondering,
I
those of you who are maybe having a hard time, go up to the top and hit the view, but Faith, I'm gonna ask you maybe to reshare the screen.
okay, I'm going to stop share and then I'm going to reshare. So let's see. Are you
Mm.
seeing this okay now? Is it the full screen that you're seeing?
I am.
Yeah, and I am too. So I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Um, Melissa, can you highlight the speaker? That might help.
Sure. So actually what happened was I had pinned Faith so that she would be, highlighted as the speaker. What I ended up doing was actually unpinning her, so I'm hoping that actually
Okay.
might help.
Okay.
I
I
love
think,
technology, right?
right.
So,
Okay. A lot of people are seeing it, so we're gonna continue on.
okay, awesome. So, one of the most common complaints that we have in the state of Florida is fire ants. And I'm going to go into a bit of detail on fire ants as we go through the presentation. Some of you might be in an area where you have the tawny crazy ant. And I will tell you from a pest control perspective that our pest control operators, when they get the tawny crazy ant, they are praying for the fire ants to come back because the tawny crazy ant is very difficult to manage. But there are landscape recommendations that will help us with the tawny crazy ant that we'll get into. I'm not going to talk very much about mosquitoes, but know this: vegetation management is part of integrated mosquito management plans. And when we have areas that are overrun with vegetation or not pruned back, we give the mosquitoes a place to harbor. They hang out where it's cool underneath leaves, and doing some vegetation management is really helpful in terms of mosquito control. And of course, emptying any container that is going to hold water for 7 days. And in Florida, we are so lucky because we get the double whammy with mosquitoes during hurricane season. So the floodwater mosquitoes come out and those container breeding mosquitoes come out. So are we doing okay? Is everybody seeing the correct side now? We're all right?
We're doing good.
Okay, great. So other outdoor complaints, I call these, so we have what we call palmetto bugs, right? It's people yeah, it's just a common name term. And those are those big cockroaches that can come into your living space. If you have a gap, the thickness of a quarter, these cockroaches can come in. So how do you know if you're dealing with that issue where they're coming in from the outside? If you stand on the inside of your house and you can see light coming through the door, that's enough. That's enough for these palmetto bugs / large peridomestic cockroaches to get into your space. So exclusion is going to be key. We have another one, another cockroach, which is the Asian cockroach, which is, it looks just like the German cockroach, except it's outdoors and it flies. And one of the things you can do is change your lighting to a wavelength that is going to be not attractive because they will fly to lights on our porch. These other occasional invaders, the millipedes, the isopods, centipedes, earwigs, crickets, and even our filth flies, right? They're going to be exclusion problems. So if we can have a house that has good screening, you have a good door sweep on it, these are the things that can help prevent these occasional invaders from coming into the living space. But I'm going to talk about rodents now. So the rodent that you see, this rat that you see here, that's a big rat. And I think that was an alpha male that was running around in a drop ceiling at one of our schools. So rodents are concerns to us because they provide health risks, right? But we also deal with the house mouse. Squirrels are rodents with a fuzzy tail. So we need to also be mindful of that. So I'm going to refer you to this publication that Jim Davis in Sumter County was the senior author on, Landscape Methods to Prevent Pests from Entering Your Home. And I want to start with this concept of the right plant for the right place and the proper spacing of the plants in terms of how it can impact indoor pest control. So every year we have a rodent academy and we walk around certain sites in the state of Florida. So what do you guys think about this? Is this the right place for this plant? Yes, no, yes, no. I'm not seeing anything coming up in the question and answer here. So yeah, no, thank you, Holly. It is not the right plant or the right place for this particular tree. And what it has done is allowed the rodents to shimmy up the backside of this tree and get into structures. It's also not good for the building by itself. So right plant, right place, proper spacing is going to be important for when we select plants to go around our buildings. So according to the building code, we really want to have about 2 feet of space between the outside foundation wall and where you put your landscape plants. Arthropod development and spread is really dependent on temperature. And the reason that people love to come to Florida is you don't have to shovel snow, we have great weather, and we're warm. And so I talk to my colleagues who are in Wisconsin or the Northeast, they get a fresh start every year because they have enough cold to knock back pest populations pretty significantly. And we don't have that advantage. So our warmth really is conducive to having pests thrive. We have had, so NASA puts up these temperature anomalies every few years, and you can see that over time, you can see here that we have had this warming trend going on. And whenever we have a global warming trend, it changes the pest distribution as well. So just to show you some data there, and we also have what I call severe weather. So I want to distinguish climate versus weather. Weather is short term. And when we talk about climate and climate change, that's going to be long term over a long period of time there. So everybody has impacts of weather in the state of Florida because we have a very active hurricane season. The built environment also has changed, right? So this is on the left-hand side, you see a picture of a house that might have been from about 100 years ago. And then the one on the right-hand side is going to be something that's a bit more modern, and it has it meets the building code, the current building code, and you can see the landscaping is going to be quite beautiful when it grows in as well. So the built environment allows us to keep temperatures even. So in the state of Florida, our summers are kind of severe. It's warm out there, but we put on our AC and then we crank things to, between that 70 to 78, 80 degree level. And the pests are really comfortable in this environment as well. If you're in a colder area, so I'm going to tell you a story about this. I do a lot of presentations throughout the US, and occasionally I'm invited out of the US. And so I had to do a meeting in Vancouver, and the pest control technician who picked me up, I had to confirm with him. It was an ant talk that I was giving, and Vancouver had a record of Argentine ant, which is a tropical ant species. And I had to ask him, is this a for real report, or is it something that might be just an anomaly? It wasn't confirmed. He said, oh no, I found it. And I said, really? So tell me what happened. Their hypothesis is that this tropical species came in on landscape material, put in a greenhouse, overwintered in the sewer system, and when it warmed up, the ants came back out again. So once again, we have altered the range of this invasive ant because of the built environment, because of the conditions that we have created. So state of Florida, I'm sure you've heard this in the Master Gardener training. We're number one. Okay, we're number one for invasive species. We get about 3 every month that establish. Not all of them are bad, but not all of them are going to become pests, but it's an issue for us. So I put this this biological invasion curve up just to make the point that when there is an introduction here down on the bottom, you see, by the time that somebody figures out that this is something that we've never seen before, this pest, it's almost impossible to have eradication of an invasive species. And there's just not enough people, tasked with doing surveillance for the number of invasive pests that we have coming into the state of Florida. So from my perspective, from the structural pest control side of things, I have never discovered an invasive pest. It's always been one of my pest control operators who've come and said, hey, this is kind of weird. It looks like XYZ, but it behaves differently. I have to treat it differently. Those kinds of really good observations that we get from the field. And I believe that master gardeners are in the same position. I think you see a lot, and that's why you're so important to the invasive species detections. So, yep, there we go. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to jump us back into how landscape impacts pest control, structural pest control. So limbs touching a tree roof can provide access to rodents and other pests. We really want to make sure that our landscape is pruned back properly. And this pruning part is something that the pest control industry generally does not do, because it's a different industry and it's a different skill set. So this is something that's quite important in terms of pest control. And whoops, there we go. All right. Any guesses as to what pest did this? And what I'm looking at is this. No guesses? Nope. Everybody's quiet. Oh, got a couple here. Mole. Yes, Yvonne, it's rats. Okay. So what has happened is this I'm trying to get my animation to work there. The rats have cut a path here. And what they're doing is they're hiding in this vegetation here. So how we manage our vegetation when we have a rat issue becomes quite important. So here's an inspection tip. One of the things that rats seek are shadows. They want to hide. So when we have landscape that provides harborage because it's creating a shadow like this, then if you have a rodent problem, this could contribute to their survival. So not every place has a rodent problem, and I realize that landscaping is a very it's a really important subject, right, for us. It really adds to the curb appeal of the structures that we deal with. But what we really want, if you have a rodent problem, is not this, not the plant on the left, but perhaps more of the shape of the plant on the right. And we call this design a vase, right? A V shape is what you want because there's less to cast a shadow where the rodents can hide. So New York City is awesome. The hedge here, New York City has such a really bad rodent problem, and we've created harborage all along the sidewalks because they have landscape hedges that look like that. This is a good example of a V shape to eliminate the shadows. So these kinds of landscape practices can very much help us with rodent control. So what's the hardest part of rodent control? Does anybody want to put something in the chat there? Or I'm sorry, Q&A. So while you're thinking about that, Maria has a very good question. Is it safe to use sticky traps in our practice? So if you're talking about rodent control, I would not recommend sticky traps for a number of different reasons. One, not the least of which, they call them cruel boards for a reason, but the other thing is that rats are big enough that they peel up off that sticky board, and they are very smart. They're not ever gonna um, approach that sticky trap again. So you've lost that opportunity. So, rate of reproduction, being consistent, finding the nest, body disposal. Yes, don't leave food around. You guys are awesome. So my answer is always, again, the hardest part of rodent control is the people, right, that cause our people practices that cause rodent infestations, but also finding them because they come out at night, they can get into small holes and cracks and crevices. And so what a lot of folks in the industry have gone to are game cameras, and they use these game cameras to help detect rodents. So they're great tools. You might have to have Wi-Fi or an SD card for some of them, but they can confirm activity, help you identify those entry points, and reduce visits for having to do control. So one of my team members here, he thought he'd just give it a try, and he put this rodent box out, and he put the game camera out, and he said he wasn't kidding. Within 20 or 30 minutes, he had a rodent in that rodent box. They were able to capture its activity, and his wife just freaked out because it was so close to the house. So game cameras can be extremely helpful to confirm that activity. But I wanted to show you this. This is what I did on my summer vacation. There are now rodent monitors and insect monitors that are incorporating AI. And I think artificial intelligence is definitely going to impact our future, especially where monitoring is concerned. So I'm old enough that I spent many, many hours counting insects on a yellow sticky board and then trying to identify them after they've been stuck on a glue board for, I don't know, a week. It's really hard. And it would probably be over an hour for me to do one sticky board. Okay. This company, we've been working with them, and we've known about their efforts in AI for about a decade now. And this year, our plan is to install not only the insect sticky boards, but also the rodent cams. And I want to talk to you about the rodent cams in a bit, but this is the thing that I love. So this here is a scanner that can read a sticky board in 90 seconds. they can identify 25 insect groups with about 90% accuracy. So we're gonna, our plan is to validate this in the US. And I don't know of any other US companies doing the identification part. Definitely the counts are out there. There are monitors that can do the counts for us. But this rodent thing, this is what we installed last week, and it's called R-type for rodents. And what it is it's an infrared camera that when there's movement, it shoots data up to the cloud, and then you can get a notification via email or on your phone to see rodent activity. So what I want you to do is see this blue area here. I'm going to run the video and you're not going to see anything for a little bit. And then there's going to be a yellow box. And that's going to be the rodent activity. I picked this particular video because it was easier to see the rodent, but this camera can actually see things that are further back in the shadows there, in the dark part. So let me get this going here. So that yellow box there, there's a rodent. See the eye? 2 eyes, right? I think it's so cool. I check this thing every morning. It's like watching a movie for me when I get up in the morning. I can't wait to see what's going on in this drop ceiling. But what is also really critically important for us is the ability to capture data. So there are some false positives in here. So when there's like too much steam coming out of a pipe, I can see that, and I haven't eliminated that from this data set yet. But we know that the majority of the activity is happening in the 1 to 2 a.m. time period. And I probably need to update this at this point, but there's a definite trend here. So we know that when they're active, we also know where they're active because of the video. So it has impacted our recommendations on where to put those traps. So I think it was cool. This is my summer vacation project. So the key to rodent control, right, is going to be to follow the rub marks. So if you see this kind of rubbing, that's from the sebum or the oil that's on the rodent body. And so we know that this particular school had a problem with rats inside the cafeteria because it was going down this the rain gutter, going underneath the slab and coming up through cracks in the slab. So we were able to track that, and they were able to fix that. There's also a smell associated with rodents, just like there's a smell associated with German cockroaches. I can bring a German cockroach colony if we were doing an in-person. I don't know if I want to bring those rats into our space. Gnawing is also going to be evidence of, and eliminating competing food sources is going to be super helpful too. So know your property and the surrounding areas. One of the things that we recommend is doing a walk around the structure and making note of any kinds of gaps in the structure and the landscape as well, because the landscape contributes to that pest population. Every year we have Bobby Corrigan come down to the Rodent Academy to do our Rodent Academy, and next year we are confirmed with him from March 31 to April 2. Bobby is the rat king in the most kind, loving sense of the word. Okay, so he works out of New York City, and he works with the rat czar up there. But everyone in the industry, I mean, when he talks, his rooms are just packed. And if you have the opportunity, it would be fantastic to be able to come down to see him. There is a registration fee. I'll chat with Wendy a little bit more about this. So here's more, right? This is our rodent burrow. So if you see holes like that, while you're walking the landscape, that's going to be super important to make note of. That's what we mean by gnawing marks. And you can inspect ceiling tiles too. So these teeth marks, actually, if it's 2 millimeters across, that's probably mouse. And if it's 4 millimeters across, it's rat. So pest exclusion is pest prevention and sanitization is rodent control. That's what Bobby's mantra is on rodents. It's really important while you're doing the walk around to note what kinds of things you can do to prevent intrusion of rats from the outside, and exclusion is going to be key. You can't just do exclusion with any old material. So this is hardware cloth. So Palmatola he just retired from FDAX, but we do a demonstration on how to do this kind of exclusion. So you really need to have gloves to protect your hands when you're using hardware cloth, but you can't just take oh, great stuff, right? Because rodents they have a bite pressure of 6,000 pounds per square inch. They will very easily go through that great stuff by itself. Great stuff, if you are going to use it to hold that hardware cloth temporarily, maybe, but you really want to make sure that you have something that the rodents can't chew through. And that, I'm sorry, I love duct tape. I use duct tape all the time for stuff, but it is not going to stop a rodent. And this was one attempt at rodent control in a situation that we were called to. So rodent proofing, there is a product called Excluder. It's singular, and that's why I'm calling it out. And it's also available in the big box stores. So if you look for Excluder, or I mean, you can see that I mean, the product line is pretty immense. I would use it around if you have a hole and you need something to fill it with. This Excluder fill fabric works very well. And it's not the same thing as taking like steel wool or copper to fill gaps with. The rodent-proof door sweeps are also quite effective. I mean, the entire line is quite good, but you can find this at the big box stores. And sanitation, there's Bobby. So what we have is a problem with emptying our dumpsters enough. And you want to make sure that you empty dumpsters frequently. So leaving the tops open, and I work on campus. I see this stuff all the time where the dumpster lids are left open. It's not only a problem for rodents, rodent control, but also flies. So we want to make sure that we have regular trash pickup. Okay, check this out, y'all. So every year I go to the Parade of Homes. I love looking at the landscaping. I wish I had that kind of green thumb. My husband does. I don't. But this is fabulous. But when I see this, there's something that goes off in my brain going, there's a lot of water that they put on that turf. We have made this area habitable for a lot of pests because we've given enough, I guess, resource for plants to look this good. And if the plants are looking this good, it's also good for pests. Okay. So one of the things that we do, this has great curb appeal, but one of the things we do is we mulch. And from a pest control perspective, moisture is the root of all evil, meaning infestation. So we have a training house down in Apopka, and this is a couple of years ago. And yes, I know it's our state facility, right? But I went down to do a training and I saw this mulch all piled up on the side of my training house, and it was there the next week that I went down. This is not a good thing for the structure. It is fabulous for pests. So we want to make sure that if we're using mulch, we want to allow at least within the couple feet of the outside foundation wall to allow a natural drying cycle, because that'll help prevent those pests that we talked about earlier, like the millipedes and the isopods, all those occasional invaders, from creating it's not a habitable environment for them. One of the other things that having mulch that high does is it obscures that inspection space. And in the state of Florida, we have more termite species in Florida than the rest of the United States. We have 7 invasive termite species, including 2 Coptotermes species. So one is a Formosan subterranean termite and one is the Asian subterranean termite. And what we don't want to do is create a conducive condition for termites around our structure for many, many reasons. So putting putting a sprinkler head that close to the outside foundation wall is probably a violation. Well, it is a violation of the building code, but it also creates a conducive condition. And the pest control guy who got there must have known it because they put a centercon station right next to where that sprinkler head was. So one of the reasons that you don't want to have conducive conditions around your house is it may void your termite warranty. So if you have a termite warranty on your house, you really want to make sure that you're taking care of those conducive conditions. And again, conducive conditions are going to be things that obscure the inspection space, allow water or moisture to build up so that the termites can live in a certain area. So the picture up top is here's an inspection space, and we can see that mud tube going up the side of the outside foundation wall. Again, you want to plant your shrubs at least 2 feet away from your home, and here's why. So this is on the right-hand side. This is termite tunneling in a dish, right, in a laboratory, but it shows you that they kind of have to divide the foraging area pretty evenly. They're not directed, so to speak, when there's no guideline for them. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the minute that they hit a pipe, or it could be a root, right, of a plant, they're going to follow that guideline in as long as they can because they're having to take, I don't know, 4 or 5 grains of sand in their mouth to move things, move sand. And if they don't have to do that, they're going to just follow that guideline. It decreases the amount of work that it takes them to find something, and that something could be your house. So the picture on the right-hand side here, we don't want to see that with your landscape too close up to the side of the house. Again, obscures the inspection space, and it allows these termites entry because they're following the guideline of the root structures to the outside foundation wall. And if you don't have protection around your house, that's going to be an issue in the end. I know some of you are on top of the news, and we do have the Coptotermes hybrid found in the field, but let me say, I'm going to say this a couple of times. We have controls that can work against the hybrid, number one. The second thing is, we don't know what the size of the colonies are of this hybrid between Coptotermes, which is the Formosan sub, and the Asian subterranean termite. We don't have field numbers on the size of the colony. One of the reasons that people are afraid of the Formosan subterranean termite is because of the size of the colony. So you can have millions of individuals in an acre, okay? You can actually build your house on a large colony, but we have good controls now for these species. In the laboratory, the hybrid, the cross between the Asian subterranean termite and the Formosan subterranean termite, it looked like the colonies were going to be bigger, but after about year 3 or 4, the colonies kind of petered out. So it wasn't the hybrid vigor that we were expecting. Something just doesn't work when there's that hybrid going on. We have another EDIS publication for you. It's free, Termite Prevention and Control. And it'll tell you what to do for termite control, what to expect, and the different species of termites that we have in the state of Florida. One thing that you do have to look out for is mud tubes are evidence of subterranean termites, but we have ants that create mud tubes, and we have the big-headed ant, and sometimes our fire ants can also create what looks like a mud tube. So knock that tube open. The termites put lignin in their tubes, so it's a little bit more substantial. And then the fire ants and the big-headed ants, they don't have that capacity to put that lignin into the tubes, so the tubes fall apart really easily when you touch it. In terms of invasive ants, fire ants are number one. Every year, the pest control industry does a market poll, and this year fire ants came up as number one. In the state of Florida, we are like fire ant heaven here. One of the reasons that we want to make sure that we give effective control measures for fire ants is because people can die because of the anaphylaxis and the venom. So we have really good publications in the EDIS bank there, but we highly recommend baiting for fire ants. What we don't like to see are the homemade fire ant, you know, there's a bunch of stuff out there, misinformation about fire ant killers. This particular one is talking about fire ants, and that's not even fire ants on the, this is AI generated stuff. And that was a clue to me that I probably shouldn't trust this. One of the things that we hear a lot from homeowners is, can you spray my lawn, especially for fire ants, right? We don't like spraying, and here's why. It's probably one of the least effectives. You're only going to get about 20% of the colony foraging at any one time, because foraging outside that fire ant mound is quite dangerous. Most of the time, the ants spend inside the mound, and we're talking like 90% of the time inside the mound, only 10% outside. So what you do when you spray is you just make them angry and then they move. So what we do like is baiting. So we use a method called the two-step that actually came out of Texas. And you want to bait on a good day to have a picnic. So you want to bait between 70 and 90 degrees. If it gets too hot, those fire ants are going to go down into the mound and they won't pick up the bait. Probably don't want to bait within 24 hours of rain or irrigation, because they're going to be very busy fixing their house. We used to say that the baits won't retain their palatability if there's too much water put on the bait. But the other Oi, my husband, David, is also an entomologist, actually started running studies to see if that was true, because we couldn't find data that showed that once fire ant bait got wet, it wasn't palatable anymore. And what he found was that there was a little bit of a decrease in mortality of the ants when they were fed bait that was wet and then dried out, but it wasn't statistically significant. So that really helps us by opening the window of when we can treat by baiting for fire ants. So broadcast baiting is really what we want to do. Again, you know, you probably don't want to have too much water going on the bait. This is the entomology department, by the way. We water our walls on a regular basis. This is not good. Okay. But what we want to do is make sure that the ants are picking up the bait at an optimal time in an optimal way. I see this all the time where there's fire ant bait that's put on top the mound. That's like going to Publix and throwing your groceries up on your roof, y'all. It is not something that's going to be effective. It's not optimal. What we want to do is to take our granular bait and follow the label directions. So you're going to take about a quarter cup of bait and you're going to scatter that bait in a 1 to 3 foot diameter around the top of the mound. Okay. And the reason is because those ants are going to be foraging through exit tunnels that are right around that mound. And then they'll pick up the bait and then they share it via trophallaxis. So the bait has a toxicant in it, and we're exploiting the ant behavior to share that toxicant through the colony. So you're not having to go and find every single ant and kill every single ant. So you can take a screenshot of this if you want. These are the current fire ant baits that we have out there, and I've split them into what the label identifies the areas that it's approved for between urban and non-crop versus agriculture. Probably the most common one, and we can get this over the counter too, is Amdril. It has hydromethanol. It's still very effective. So I also get this question, do ants get resistant to the pesticides that we put out for them? And the answer is no. And there's been, I don't know, decades of research demonstrating that for whatever reason, social insects like ants and termites do not become resistant to the products that we use, as opposed to things like cockroaches or bed bugs that develop resistance quite quickly. So that's one. And then this one is for also our non-crop area. So extinguish here. Extinguish is singularly important to us because this bait does not have any grazing restrictions. So we get a lot of questions on whether I can put this out in my horse pasture, right? This is the only bait that can be used for those purposes because there's no grazing restriction on the label. The active ingredient is an insect growth regulator. So this one can also be screenshot. You might have heard about this in the news. This is our other stinging ant that is coming down into Florida. It's the Asian needle ant, and it's been here for a while in the US. But for whatever reason, the news picked it up and it kind of went on fire in June. So we're handling calls, a lot of calls on what about this Asian needle ant? It does have a potent sting. The colonies are much smaller than the fire ants. So we're talking colonies of maybe 5,000. They're going to be living under rocks and leaf litter and debris, whereas the fire ants can be 250,000 in a colony. And you might have fire ant mounds being built right at parent pickup at schools or on the islands and shopping centers where the public is going to be much more apt to run into them. So it's a primitive ant. It has a really cool cocoon like that just you can it's very recognizable. So this is the current distribution of this Asian needle ant now. Again, discovered in 1932. We only have a couple of spots, and part of it is I think we're not looking for this ant in particular. But North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, states north of us, they have a serious problem. And there is an anaphylactic risk with this particular ant. We have similar ants, medically important ants in the state of Florida that can look like that Asian needle ant. So this one here on the top left is your Asian needle ant. And this one on the right is Odontotermes. I think it's Brunius. So Odontotermes is a termite predator, and the bottom is a twig ant. And if you're out in the garden at all, you're gonna run into these twig ants. They're pretty. Oh, I've been stung. They hurt. So, but they're singular. They're not a social insect. They don't live in a colony. So here's just some general information on the Asian needle ant. It's Brachyponera chinensis. It's a pretty good size ant. I think it's a nice looking ant. It's nice and shiny, but my poor termite here is getting just eviscerated. There is a painful sting, and we have about 1 to 4 species that have been introduced in the US. In terms of control, so again, we're not endorsing any product. We're just showing what the data are. There's probably near complete reduction after 1 day of treatment with Max Force Complete. And again, this is from a research study that came out in 2012. So we know that there's data for this and that this will work. Population reductions will last for up to 28 days based on this study. And recently, a graduate student just published that Avion, which is also a fire ant bait, exhibited 100% decrease in her field trials and also a decrease in foraging activity. So we have options that work in terms of control. So here's the most recent research on that one. I am going to skip through this one right now. So, because I gotta tell you this story about landscape. So every few years we have our trees structurally pruned because we don't want the trees to fall on our house. So this is my awesome carpenter ant adventure here. They were taking down some trees that we knew were going to be a problem or some branches. We have 2 types of carpenter ants in Florida. So understand that at my house, we have 2 entomologists, right? So we think that they're entertainment, but a lot of people find the carpenter ants quite annoying in their space, and they're very difficult to control. So the one that is most common in the state of Florida is the Florida carpenter ant. So this is the one that has the blackish abdomen, the reddish kind of body. And so I was getting ready to take the trash out. And check this out. I see this underneath my trash can. Can you see that? Is that video going okay? Right? So I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I put the trash can back because I wanted to see what is going to happen next. Because my hypothesis has been that the house is too dry. Our relative humidity inside the house, if you're running any kind of air conditioning, it's too dry for these ants to survive. So I put the trash can back, and a couple of days later, I lift the trash can up, and true, but sadly, my carpenter ants have died. But there's another ant that's moved in. It's the big-headed ant, and they were feeding on the carpenter ant remains. So this is a lesson for us in terms of IPM. Sanitation is important. If I picked up those carpenter ant carcasses, I would not have had the big-headed ants come into my house. I'm certain of that. And the big-headed ants are actually a bigger problem, in my opinion, than the carpenter ants are. So take-home message is that carpenter ant control is not easy. They don't live well inside air conditioning, so sweeping and vacuuming is always going to be a good option for us. And sanitation is really the key to ant management here. From a landscape perspective, carpenter ants prefer to nest in moist wood. They love those tree branches. And what happens is if your tree branches are touching your cabling, I live in it's an older house. If your tree branches are touching your coax cable or your electrical lines and whatnot, they're going to use that to walk across into your structure. And once they've made it to your house, it's really easy for them to get in. So they will get up into door frames, windowsills that have wood decay and hollow doors and other structural voids. This is a current list of ant baits. I'm sorry, Wendy, I'm really behind on my EDIS publications, but this is a current list of what we have for ant control. So you can screenshot that, or I can send it to Wendy later on. And also, I have a colleague who's up at Tennessee. We were buddies here when we were students at the University of Florida. And she's like my ant go-to person as well, besides my husband. And she has this for her pest control operators. It's free. So if you just want to Google quick reference guide to pesticides for pest management professionals, it's a very nice summary table that she has put together. So here's our integrated pest management plan. Sanitation is going to be number one. Exclusion is possible, especially with our carpenter ants. So once again, if you're standing on the inside of your doors or your windows and you're looking out and you can see light coming in, that's enough for many, many pests to make it into our structures. We do have products that can be helpful in control. Our preference is baits because it exploits the ant's behavior of trophallaxis, which shares the toxicant. It decreases the amount of pesticides that you put into the environment. So let me just mention something about fire ant control. If you're putting out a bait, the label rate looks more like 7 to 9 granules in a square foot. It's almost impossible to see, as opposed to gallons of insecticide going out. And it's going to be more effective as well. So again, remove debris. So with a tawny crazy ant, we know that you can get about 20% reduction if you take the debris off the property. Wipe down counter surfaces. If they get into the house, the ants, regular trash removal is going to be something for a lot of indoor pests. And don't leave dirty dishes in the sink. Spills, clean those up immediately. I have to say this. I get this all the time. I have sugar ants. That's not helpful to me. Okay. Sugar ants, everybody has sugar ants because all ants eat sugar. So if you need an identification, please submit it to our insect ID lab, and Lyle is amazing. I also have this for you free. If you're in an area with tawny crazy ant, we have recommendations here for how to manage the tawny crazy ant. Right now, we're going to hit a cold spell, and this is a good time to start taking care of these tawny crazy ants. So as the weather gets colder, the colonies of the tawny crazy ant will contract around the base of trees and shrubs. You and your pest control operator can put a contact insecticide around the base of the trees or shrubs to kind of knock back that population. And then the next year, you should have a little bit of a decrease in those ants if you're in this tawny crazy ant area. So, Wendy, I'm done. I think I made it, right? the 5 minutes for questions. So
You totally made it, but we may have to ask you to hold on a little bit longer so we can do the questions.
awesome.
Because there's so many
Okay,
questions, but
yeah, no
that's
problem.
good.
So let me stop share.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds good. Well, actually, you may want to share because some of the people that when it was small, they didn't get to see the first few, so they wanted to see those again.
Do you want me to go back up to the
Yeah.
front
Mhm.
of the? Okay, let me see.
Yeah, just to look at the first few that they wanted to see. Um, I mean, we're gonna have so much fun with these questions. Here's one. What about rats eating wires in your car engine?
Oh my gosh, that was a problem because I don't have a good method of control for that. But the reason was that they switched to a soy-based encasement, right, for the wires.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I don't, somebody might have a good answer, but I don't have a good answer for that one.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
we had that issue here on campus
Yeah.
with some of our vehicles. I think we contacted you about it, but we were able to they did the traps around the area and then we put something underneath the hood. I think that they did some repellent or something. Is that possible that that's what they did? Or maybe they rewired them, Faith. I think that's what they ended up doing.
It might be. Yeah. I haven't heard of that being an issue of late. So there might have been some kind of modification to that, the
Okay.
wire itself. Yeah.
All right. Someone asked about raccoons, but that's for another specialist. We're dealing with Faith today. Those rat boxes that you showed the video of first, does that have a chemical in it?
No.
And they just go in there and hide? How do those things work?
Okay. So Joe just put that one out just to see what would come into the box. What
Okay.
we recommend is actually putting a snap trap in the box.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
And there's a lot of controversy over rodenticides right now, but the snap traps seem to be the most humane way because it's very quick, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And since you brought up the rodenticides, the master gardeners, a few of them asked about, if we're poisoning these creatures, how does this impact our predator birds and other creatures that eat rodents? And what's the University of Florida's opinion on that?
So we are still waiting on the EPA's. It's probably been 5 years. We've been in discussions with EPA. It's called the risk mitigation, rodenticide risk mitigation, something, something. I forget what it is. But there's some guidance that will be coming out, I hope, by the end of this year, specifically on rodenticides. What we don't want to do is kill our non-targets. And what was happening was because the rodenticides were being used improperly, meaning outside of a bait station like that, people were throwing it out into everywhere. Um, there was a risk of primary exposure because some of our non-targets might eat that. The second thing was carcass, right? That non-target would pick up a carcass. It's a real concern. So
Sure.
one of the things that the EPA had recommended was trying to find the carcasses. Well, that's almost impossible. So the home range of a rodent is 450 feet, the diameter. There's almost no way to search that. So
Yeah.
our recommendations have been to use snap traps inside those monitors, but you have to have the placement exactly correct.
Okay.
I don't want to discount the use of rodenticides because in states and countries where they've banned their SGARs, the second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, where they banned that, they're starting to see an uptick of medieval diseases. So it's a
Yeah.
balance, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. right. You know, your mission is about human wellness, Faith.
Correct.
And yeah, I understand that. So Michelle is wondering about those ultrasonic pest repellers.
Just know.
Just to know.
So
Just
what
know.
happens is they're not effective against the pests, but it could make your dogs go deaf. It's at that same frequency. Yeah.
Wow, I don't even have a dog anymore, and that's shocking to me. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there any research going on to develop a smell to attract rats to lead them to the trap?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, um, that's tricky because there are pheromones that rodents give out, but any kind of pheromone chemistry, it's always trying to find that balance of the mix of compounds that will become attractive. The second thing is there is nobody who wants to say, I created something that attracted rats to my house. So, but it's the concept has been out there.
Yeah, the rats to the trap. Okay. Christine said that Manatee County's plans to go from 2 days a week garbage collection to 1 day a week works against the efforts of pest control. Do you agree?
So I think it depends on where you are. So once a week pickup is fine for flies, right? If you're in an area where there are rodents, that's going to depend on how that trash is stored. So if it's in a trash bin with a closable lid, it's probably okay. The problem that New York City has is the streets are not wide enough for those trucks that have the arm to take the bin and throw it into the truck. So they just put bags out on the street. And that is a problem.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there any ants that farm termites? You know the master gardeners, they have such interesting questions.
This is really cool.
I know.
Are there any ants that farm termites? I don't know of them farming termites, but there was a study that was done probably 15 or 20 years ago that there was a graduate student who went along the side of the road and he dug up, I don't know how many fire ant mounds, and in 20% of the mounds that he dug up, there were termites and fire ants in the mound.
Interesting.
And they didn't fight until we disturbed them, right? They were like, "Oh, you're here," and the ants started eating the termites. So yeah, but that's a good question.
Very interesting. The whole concept of ants and their society, you know, there's a lot more to be discovered there, right?
So
Um,
you
we'll fi-
always talk about the homopterans, right? The aphids and the
yeah,
commensalism. Yeah, okay.
yeah, they know about that. Will fire ant baits also kill other ants?
So that's a really good question. The one that we know that it works really well against is the big-headed ants, which is also another invasive species. It seems that the fire ant baits have not impacted our native ant populations. So very effective against two invasive species.
Okay, okay, that's positive. And Janice is asking what eats ants in Florida?
Wow. Besides the anteaters at the zoo, oh, I saw them at the Jacksonville Zoo. I think that when they swarm, probably the birds pick off the swarmers. I've seen that, but I haven't seen that kind of predation. Ants will eat other ants, right?
Okay, other ants. And I know that chickens are pretty tough on ants.
Mm, yeah.
That's not a is normal. That's not a normal. That's an introduced creature, right?
Well, but it's like they're so tiny. I wonder how can that be a satisfying meal? But that's different. Yeah.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the Argentinian ant? She believes that, or they believe that they have them in the garden. They are small and red, but not fire ants.
Mm,
They like to make nests under the cracks of the stepping stones and build mounds around them.
build mounds. Okay, so the Argentine ants typically don't build mounds,
Okay.
but we do have story myrmex, which is the pyramid ant that looks like it's a mound, but it has a little dip in the middle. I actually had a picture of that in here and I kind of blew through it. Let me see if I can find that again. So that ant, the pyramid ant, is actually a predator of the fire ant.
Oh, okay.
So we don't want to get rid of those ants because nature hates a void, right? So when you get rid of all of your good insects, the next most invasive species moves in, and that's a problem. I don't know what I did with that picture, Wendy.
Okay.
I'll flip.
So is it about the same size as the imported, red imported fire ant?
Well, it could be, but the legs are a little bit longer.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Let's see. Have you heard about using cold pressed orange oil for fire ants? I used it and they are still gone after many years.
Huh. Um, I've heard of orange oil, but not cold pressed. And
Okay.
I am really hesitant about making recommendations that don't have um, some kind of EPA performance testing associated with it.
Okay, all right. So until it's proven, we know.
Correct.
For crazy ants and roaches, put your pantry boxes in plastic containers and plastic bags. Yeah, I mean, this is growing up in South Florida. I mean, we just had to be preventative all the time. And the house I grew up in was built in the 20s. And so I think that a lot of openings were there. They never sealed it up. So we just, we're pantry, we were in containers and in freezers and, so I mean, we shouldn't have to be there, but what would you say about that?
So I'm trying to, can you repeat that question one more time?
So she's
Putting
saying
ants or roaches?
just if you're having issues, just to bag everything in the pantry and put them in glass jars or
Yep.
plastic bags and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And my flour, I love to bake. I just don't bake that often. I put that in freezer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Someone was asking about ghost dance.
Oh,
Sorry
they're
about that.
everywhere.
Okay.
So ghost ants are really tiny. And what I would recommend for those is using some kind of liquid or a gel bait. And
Okay, gel
those seem
bait.
to work quite well. And you can go and get borate-based baits. I found it, Wendy. Check this out. Here we
Okay,
go.
let's see it.
So this is, oh, here we go, share. So this is the pyramid ant,
Oh,
the mound, and that's what the ant looks like. And
okay.
so there is confusion oftentimes between this ant and the fire ant because of that mound structure. But this is actually a predator of fire ants. It's
Great.
biocontrol. Yeah.
And other people are calling that Argentinian? Are they
No,
interchangeable?
it's
No.
not. So the
Okay.
Argentine ants are quite different. The
Okay.
Argentine ants have a very distinct trailing, so you can actually see them cut like trails in
Okay.
your soil. Yeah, so
Okay.
you can see them six across very
Okay.
easily. Yeah.
Well, I have seen these pyramid ant mounds and I will not disturb them anymore. Do we have them in Gainesville?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then I have those. I'm gonna leave them alone. Somebody mentioned, oh, now this is an excellent question about landscape. Is it safe to put gravel around the base of your house?
I love this
I
question. So
know.
it seems like it would be a good idea for termites, right? Because it's gravel is not something they consume, but there was research that was done probably 20 years ago that demonstrated that pea gravel, they put cardboard underneath pea gravel and some other different types of mulches, and the pea gravel cardboard actually had more consumption than any of the other types of mulches. And the hypothesis was that the pea gravel maintained the moisture enough or more than the other mulches that were there. So I'm a little bit hesitant about pea gravel around my house from a termite perspective.
From a
Yeah.
termite perspective. Always leaving that inspection space, never coming up to the inspection space with anything,
Right.
whether it be gravel, mulch, anything. And I learned that the hard way. I got termites from piling mulch up against basically stuccoed salad board before the inspection space was part of the code. And
Oh,
yep, so that was a long time ago. Now that space is coded. So yeah. All right. Dr. Colin Burrows, of course, is always going to hit us with the hard question because this is exactly correct. So he says when trimming hedges in Florida-friendly landscaping, we talk about tapering to the top to ensure that the light reaches the base. So
mm.
the image that you showed, which is what I call ugly ankles to have the no
Yeah.
shadows, is actually not Florida friendly because it shades the base and then we lose the bottom and it provides, it can, help the plant to demise a lot more quickly. So that's counter to Florida friendly, and he's right. And I'm gonna try to set you up here, Faith. My thought is that we follow Florida friendly until we have a problem, and then
I
we
would
address
agree
it.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would
So
agree
if
with
you want to reiterate that for Colin, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so uh, d- those recommendations that we have about using a V shape are critically important if you already have a problem, a rodent problem, because you want to make sure that you can inspect under those trees and shrubs. If you don't have a problem, I'm not married to that. We have stuff at our house because we don't have a rodent problem, right? That's not in everything's not in that V shape because sometimes, Wendy, it's just not only is it not healthy for the plants, it's just an ugly landscape.
Right,
So,
right. But if you're dealing with a client that is having a reoccurring rodent problem, this is something that we would recommend and say, it's counter to what we normally teach for Florida friendly, but this is an issue of health and, and you having a happy home. So let's go ahead and make
yeah,
adjustments.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, thank you so much. And a great question, Colin. I appreciate that. Okay. Do the baits harm cats or other wildlife?
So is this rodent bait or ant bait that we're talking about?
Probably. Well, why don't we address both?
So the rodent bait, I'd be concerned about rodent bait because that would be secondary on mammals. For the ant baits, no.
Okay. Okay. And Yvonne is saying that she has little fire ants, multiple colonies, multiple queens. They get into the electrical contacts of our water pump and foul the contacts.
So for these little ants, okay, like the little fire ant, the odorous house ant, we have some that are rover ants that are really, really tiny. I recommend using a gel or a liquid bait because their mandibles are too small to get around the granular baits. So you can get a liquid bait that's a borate based product over the counter, and that would be helpful. The issue with the little fire ants, it's Wasmania, Wendy. It's in the top 100 global invasive species of ants,
Wow.
and it's moving through the state of Florida right now. And from an agricultural perspective, there's data that shows that there's corneal lesions on cacao harvesters because it falls on them. So we need to,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah, we need to be really mindful about this ant. Um, we have them, and I just kind of brush them away, but get a liquid or a gel bait, and that will help.
Liquid or gel bait. The sting of that ant is really painful.
It's painful.
I mean, for such a little thing, it's like, wow. So over at the Field and Fork garden,
Yeah.
they
Yes.
have it in the irrigation manifold, and I was just resting my arm, and I was like, wow, and it persisted. Okay, I'm gonna
Yes.
stop whining. We'll get on. Okay. How long is that bait effective after the container is opened? And why do sometimes the baits get ignored? Could they perhaps be old?
Oh my gosh, this is a awesome question. Okay. And I'm talking about fire ants right now. So the fire ant bait is really, the toxicant is mixed in an oil, like a soybean oil. If the oil goes rancid, if it smells like rancid potato chips or something, it's not good. The ants are not going to pick it up.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Really great to know. Really great to
Oh,
know.
and so Wendy, there's actually a study. It's usually within 6 months. So
Okay.
you need to keep it in a cool space and use it within 6 months. So don't buy 50 pounds of fire ant bait if you don't need it. Yeah.
This is really good information to share with your clientele, you all, because they might say, well, I have bait and it doesn't work. Well, let's ask them, how old is it and does it smell like rotten potato chips?
Yeah.
Okay. And then so Susan's asking about the pump wells, and it sounds like gel would be the best thing to use there.
Oh,
Piggy
wait,
Reed,
so can
go
I go
ahead.
back to that one?
Yep,
Pump wells to prevent ants from
shorting it out.
so it depends which ant.
Okay,
So gel baits generally in the summertime will work across the board for our ants, but there's some times where you might want to put a granular bait out too. So the pump wells, yeah, it depends on what kind of ant.
okay.
So
So get that ant identified,
yes.
and as Faith mentioned, if you don't know, if you can take a really good picture and email it to Lyle Buss, he's just amazing. He will get that proper identification back to you, and it's really great. Let's see. Oh my goodness. Okay. Spider control, we're not going to talk about that. Oh, what about the diatomaceous earth?
So if you put diatomaceous earth on the ants, you probably kill it, but there's not going to be that longevity of it. And part of it is because we're so humid, right? So there's a place for DE, but I wouldn't put DE in the colony control category.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. And Yvonne is seeing, um, we find these under the boots of our palm trees out in the yard. Obviously, once we get them under control, ones in the neighbors' yards come back in. I guess it's one of the ants that we talked about previously.
Yeah. So that's about these ants. Are you talking about the fire
Maybe
ants?
fire ants. Yeah, maybe we should address it from that perspective.
So nature hates a void. And if you have nothing to take that place, so you don't want to get rid of every single ant in your yard. If they're native ants that are not bothering your living space, I would leave them alone, right? But if it's a fire ant, that's a special concern. So I would bait, and in the state of Florida, I recommend 3 to 4 times a year broadcast bait. And I will tell you with the fire ants, they will reinvade a space that has nothing in it in about 6 to 8 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Okay. Let's see. Janice is wondering about live traps and relocation of animals.
so it depends on what that animal is, and I think that's a FWC type issue.
Mhm.
So for bats, there's a maternal season and we can't touch them,
Okay.
right? For rodents, we don't recommend live trapping and relocating because their home range is so large. They're going to get back to your space anyway. And they're a vector of pathogens. So this is a different talk, Wendy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it is a different talk. It is a
yeah.
different talk. Yeah, but it's good to,
It's a really good question.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, and the mosquito question, we had a mosquito talk back in July. I would encourage you to watch the recording of that from Ava. And what's the best bait to put in a rat trap? My neighbor's chickens have attracted rats.
Wow, this is so good, Susan. So, um, we have a section in our rodent academy called junk food moms, junk food babies. So it's basically whatever the mom fed on is
Oh,
going to be a good bait to snap trap a rat with. When we're
okay.
talking about a toxic bait, those are often limited to professional pest control. And you can get something in the big box stores, but you really have to be careful about how we deploy those toxic baits. The other consideration is they are always looking for nesting material. So sometimes string and dental floss are not bad. But
She said string and dental floss, you guys.
but it depends, right? And that's why the identification is important, what's life stage. So keep in mind that we have a whole 3-day course on rodents and rodent control. So those are just some short answers, but we have to keep it in context.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Lucinda says she found trap and release work. My husband named trap for his ratapult as they shoot out so quickly on release. So Lucinda's husband is Michael, and he's very intelligent and industrious. And so he must have created this crazy trap. And I want to see video of this
Yeah.
sometime, Lucinda. All right, more to come on that, Faith. Stay tuned.
Awesome.
And so someone said ants are reputed to eat termite honeydew, so we'll wait for the paper on that.
Mhm.
Oh, someone said woodpeckers can eat the ants as well as the carpenter ants.
I didn't
Okay.
think about that. Probably
And
true.
then they've also said that armadillos eat ants. So I guess, it's part of our whole ecosystem, although both the fire ant and the armadillo are not native to our area. Let's see. Lizards don't eat ants. I think lizards eat ants. They do.
Mhm.
And then Evan Earl wants to know where are fire ants native and what eats them there. So I'll let you run with that, Faith.
So they're from South America. And what was the other part of the question?
What eats them down there?
Okay, so they actually have biological control down in South America, and those are the flies. And so we have two types of, we have 1, 2, 3, no, not two. We have 12 different species of forward fly that have been identified down in South America. So when the fire ants came from South America to the United States, they did not come with their biocontrols. So when we started looking at the density, right? So in South America, it's 5 times less than what we have in the United States because the biocontrols didn't come over. So for the last 20 years or so, the USDA has been vetting these biocontrol agents, and they've been coming over and being released. And we see that population suppression when the biocontrol comes in. So the forward flies, it's the same forward flies that are going to be in your compost bin. They're just eating on debris, right? Except this one is going to lay its egg between the head, the intersegmental membrane of the head and the thorax, or between the legs. And the fly then develops into a maggot. They use the head as a puparium, and when it gets ready to emerge as an adult, the head falls off, and that's part of the control. The second thing that they're looking at is this thing called Neilhasia. It's a fungus. And what it does is it infects the fat body of the fire ants. And if it's a queen, then the fat body gets so big that it squeezes her ovaries out. So the ants the queens decrease their egg laying capacity. The third group are viruses. They're looking at viruses. So these are things that they've had an exploratory entomologist go to South America and try to identify, and they brought it back. And so the vetting process is lengthy because we can't have it impact our native species either. So yeah, that's
But
a
it's
great
working.
question.
It's been working, this biocontrol and the life work of these scientists that have worked to suppress fire ants has been successful. And we can see this in our ground nesting birds in Florida recovering, like the quail. We see a lot more turkey now. These ants were really coming after a lot of our bigger charismatic wildlife, and we're seeing a resurgence in this. So this is positive. I think I might have missed this question earlier, but this is in Palm Coast. Jean said that they're cutting down so many trees and clearing habitat for new houses that these rats surge up again. And sometimes we see this when they knock down an old building, that the rats surge. And could you speak on that a little bit? And I think that's probably going to have to be our last question.
Yeah, and he's absolutely correct that the habitat disruption causes they're just looking to live, right? The rodents are looking for another place to live. And when we disrupt their habitat, they have to go somewhere. So you're exactly correct. And I I don't know, Wendy, what, I don't know if that's
No,
satisfactory. Just
that's
is,
satisfactory.
yeah,
So I think, when you see a big clearing going on, I think that the wildlife is going to surge into the developed areas, and we just have to
yes,
understand that. You may get a client that says, "Why is this happening to me now?" And you might be able to say, "Well, they just cleared 20 acres of land near you, and they had been living there, and now they're living with you." So.
correct, correct.
Well, you all remember that Dr. Oy teaches the Pest Management University, and Master Gardeners are invited to attend that. And that's usually in May, Faith. Is that the one?
So we have classes going on throughout the year, so I
Okay.
can get you a schedule.
Okay. And we'll post that with the recording. And I don't know how if you would want to share your slides in a PDF and we could put that with the recording.
Sure, no
Okay.
problem.
And fantastic. And her email will be on that, but her email is foi@ufl.edu. And if you have questions about these things or need better input, you can always reach out to her, let her know you're a master gardener. And just we really appreciate such great information today. Thank you so much.
It's been so fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye
Bye.
now.